I've been sent an exciting box from Staedtler, which includes their Pigment Arts brush pens. So I'm going to be doing the usual tests I always do when I try out something new, which is the layering test, blending, doing all the swatching, and also using them to create some art. This is a brand new supply for me. If you've never heard of them as well, then I hope this video is helpful, and let's see what they're all about. So it was a very generous box. I'm very excited to dive in, but this is all about their Pigment Arts pen. So as I said, this is sent to me by Staedtler, so this was gifted, but they haven't paid me or asked me to talk about them. They just sent them obviously for the hope that I would share them. And I'm really excited to give these a go. So we've got a 60 set, a 24, and then this box, which I'm excited to open and see what's inside. So let's start with these. I'm running out of room on the desk already. Struggling to get everything in frame, but these are the Pigment Arts pen. So let's open up this one. So this is the 60 set and this one's the 24. Now looking at it, these are in the 60, so I think they have expanded their range to include 60. So these are all of their new colours, and then this one's the 24. They also come in a set of 36 from what I've seen. Now I'm going to talk about the differences and the difference between the brush pens I usually use and these once I've opened these up. But I'm not going to open these up. I don't need both of these, so I'm going to save this for a giveaway. So if you would like to enter to win this, it will be worldwide. I've double checked with Staedtler that they're okay with me giving this away, and they're more than happy for me to do so. I want to share the love. If you would like to win this 24 pigment brush pen set, then I've popped a link to a Google form in the description box, which you can enter if you'd like to win. And I'll put all the details there as well. So I'm going to put this away for safekeeping, and then I will open that very exciting pink bow box. But this is, let's see, comes in a little sleeve. Obviously very, very colourful packaging. And here they are. So this is all about their multi-ink. They are very much about the light fastness. So it says high light fastness, brilliant colours, premium pigments and permanent. So very much about vibrancy, and also that they stay where they are so you can layer on top of them. I specifically asked for the brush pens. They do have them in other models. So you've got Pigment Brush Pen, Pigment Soft Brush Pen, Pigment Calligraphy Pen and Pigment Pen. Now I know that I don't generally use this nib on my pen, so I asked for the brush pens, and obviously I've got plenty here to have a play with. So let me show you what the barrel looks like. I always love how it looks with the rainbow. Generally I always say to try them out individually if you want to check them out and see how they work for you, but with this video hopefully I'll be able to give you a good steer on what they're like. Nice handy pull tabs to pull these out of the box. I'll be able to show you what the pen looks like. Really nice range here, so we've got quite a lot of greens, which makes me very, very happy. Lots of neutrals and some greys there as well. Quite a few blues, not many yellows, quite a lot of reds though. Just the 3 yellows here. We've got a light tone, and we've got some more light tones over here, and a few purples. But definitely more greens than anything, which as a landscape and nature-based artist, that obviously works really well for me. But let's have a look at the nibs and talk about what these are. So I know Staedtler for stationery, and it's really interesting to me that they do these brush pens. I've never tried these out before, but here we go. So the packaging is recycled, so it's 97% recycled plastic, which is really nice, but I don't think they're refillable, so something to think about. And there's the nib, so it's much smaller than I'm used to. Really, really quite fine. So let's do a comparison to some other brush pens. So you'll probably see this on my channel. I mostly use Tombows. I've also used Ecolines, which are thicker again. And then I've also got this one to compare it to, which is a Zig Clean Colour Real Brush. Now they do act very, very differently, so I'm not going to compare them in terms of what they do because they are different. These ones are water-based. So these ones, the Ecolina, I think it's pronounced, and the Tombows I use all of the time and are my go-tos in my collection at the moment. But they are water-based, which means I can use water with them and I can get lots of different techniques. I will show you the nib. So as you can see here, they're relatively thick, but they do taper off at the end, just like the Pigment Brush Pen. Okay, so you can see it's much narrower. So I'd probably say it's a third of the size of the other ones, or maybe half. The Tombow one is longer. I would say it's about the same length as the Ecolina one as well, but you can see it's a lot narrower. So I will see how it feels as well when I do some testing. But yeah, definitely much narrower. In terms of the barrel, it's much smaller than the Echolina one. The Tombow does have the other end, the Echolina doesn't, and neither does the Pigment Brush Pen. But that's how it compares, and I also will compare it with this Zig Clean Colour Brush Pen, because that is a bit more similar in terms of size. But again, it does work quite differently. Pretty similar. I think the Zig one is a little bit wider, and I can also see more brush hairs on the Zig one compared to the Pigment Brush Pen. But if you're interested in seeing the nib, then that's how that compares with the other ones. But I love seeing all these colours. Really excited to swatch these out. So I will swatch them out in a second once I've just done a few tests just to see how the brush nib feels, and then we'll get on to the other box. I'm just doing this in my Royal Talens Art Creation sketchbook, which is my go-to sketchbook for creating in. I do use a lot of other sketchbooks too, but I think this one is the thinnest paper that I have, so I'm keen to see how it works on top. So the Pigment Arts pen boasts that it's got multi-ink, which means you can get very light, fast colour, and they say exceptional colour brilliance even after years of UV exposure. Because I work in sketchbooks generally, it's not a worry for me, but if I was using them on commission work and paintings that I'm going to sell, then that's a really big bonus because the other ones don't have that. They do say that there's no ghosting on paper, no bleeding, so that's really interesting, and I haven't found that here with the Royal Talens, so really impressed with that. I really like how it doesn't come through. Obviously with any brush pen or any pen that I'm layering onto this paper, if I do many layers, it will start to pill and obviously break down the paper. But generally I do use it as a layer and then I work on top with my coloured pencils. The multi-ink can be used on all surfaces, so photo paper, wood, and any artist paper. So it's very versatile. So I'm going to share some swatches whilst I talk to you a little bit more about this multi-ink and the Pigment Arts pen. Really satisfying doing swatches. I always find it's really helpful to do because the colour sometimes differs from what is in the pen, from the packaging. So it's permanent and waterproof, which is very different from the other brush pens, as I said. I do have a video about using my Tombows if you want to see how I use those with water, so I'll leave that linked up in the cards, but obviously this one is waterproof, which means it's better for layering and a bit less versatile in terms of using it with water. I found that it dries pretty quickly, and then once it is dried you can go over on top, but the drying time does depend on the paper that you're using it on, so if it was a glossy paper then it would take longer to dry. The other thing I'm going to test in a minute is the intensity of the colour, so building up lots of layers by going over the same ink colour multiple times just to see how saturated I can get it, and I'm going to be doing that on other paper. Because you can layer on top, it also means I can mix new colours, and I also want to test out the blending, which I don't often do with my work, but I think it will be helpful to show you. And then I'll also test it with gradients as well, which you can do as long as the ink is still wet. So we'll have a little play, but very satisfying seeing these full pages of swatches, and I'm going to open the other box of goodies now too. Okay, so here is the very pretty big box in here. It's probably one of the most generous packages I've had from an art brand. Look at this little guy. Okay, this is just my postcard about the Pigment Arts pens. So their new thing is the multi-ink blending liquid. So I'm going to have a little play with that. A big thank you to Staedtler for sending me all of these things. Really am grateful. Oh, look, it's like a proper PR package. I never get these, but we've got a little travel mug, coffee cup thing right there with the Pigment Arts logo, I guess, for these pens on there. A tote bag as well. Obviously, they're really focused on the colour here, which is shown in their packaging. We've got a couple of bits of paper here, so actually I'll be able to test on here the blending. So we've got mixed media paper smooth and watercolour paper here. Really helpful that those have been labelled, so we'll do a test on to those. And then, so we've got a Pigment Arts pen portrait colours set. That's really nice to see. So lots of different flesh tones and portrait colours there, but also really helpful as a nature artist for me to be able to use those for rocks and paths and things like that as well. I might put this in the giveaway as well, so we'll have 2 winners. But that's helpful to see that they do come in smaller sets as well. I'm reading the packaging, it says fibre tip pens with brush nib. So there are fibres, but they do seem a bit denser than the Zig ones. Okay, then we have a water brush set. These are always super duper helpful. I generally do use my Derwent ones, but didn't even know Staedtler did these, so that's really helpful to see, and we've got the different sizes there. We have a brush set, so we've got a flat-headed one, a round, and then a small one. These two are size 8, and then we've got a size 2 there. so many things that Staedtler do that I didn't really have any clue about. So it's really helpful to see this brand and try new things. Then this is their new thing that they mentioned on the postcard. This is the multi-ink blending liquid. So I'm going to do a test of blending the pens dry, and then I'll also use this and have a little look at how we can use this alongside the pens. So this says it's for easy blending, smooth colour transitions and gradients and much more. It's a water-based colour neutral blender, best used on watercolour paper and non-absorbent surfaces. Okay, so we'll have a go with that and their paintbrush to have a little play with these pens. So I've done the swatching, but now let's have a play with how they layer and blend. Okay, so we've got watercolour paper here and the mixed media paper here. So this one is pastel yellow, so they all have names rather than numbers. So that's one layer. Let's do one layer. Let's go up to 5. So I can get quite fine lined with these. And I do really like a flexible nib, so that's good. So that's 2. Oh, I can definitely see that actually. Yeah, I can already see a difference from the pale first one with the second. I'm just waiting for them to dry each time before I go on top. Okay, 3. Okay, I can feel it's kind of pulling that bit now. Again, I can definitely see the pigments getting stronger. And then 4. Layer 5 on this one. So I think not much difference from 4 to 5, and I can also feel like it's kind of sitting on top, so it is taking longer to dry there. But hopefully you can see there. I don't know how easy it will be on camera because I think the saturation is stronger, but definitely a biggest difference from 1 to 5, or 1 to 4. I would say 4 to 5 is pretty similar. And I'll also do this on the mixed media paper. So I can see that the nib is breaking up a little bit, so it is quite flexible, but it also seems quite delicate. So I don't know if you can see that there. It's got a little bit on the end where it's coming up, but I can just sort of pull that off. Hopefully you can see that there. But I can just pull that off, but that's because it is a fibre nib. Yeah, I can definitely see a difference there. So it feels like it's just going on the paper at this stage, but when I add on the third, and especially the 4th and 5th, it feels like it's sort of pilling the paper a little bit on the watercolour paper one. So I'll see how it compares with the mixed media. So 3rd layer. Okay, there you can see the fibre tip again coming off a little bit. I think that's just because of what the nib is made up of. I don't tend to get that with my other brush pens. So I'll do a 3rd layer on these. Yeah, it kind of feels like silky almost when I do the 4th and 5th layer. It's like it's not got that resistance of the paper itself because of the layer of the pigment. I can really feel the difference there. Yeah, I don't know that that was dry because it feels like it's kind of pulling it off again. Rather than layering on top, it's kind of just sliding around. So perhaps that needs even longer to dry and I didn't give it enough time. But let's see how it layers and then I'll do some blending. So I'm going to pick a light green. And again, I'll do this on both papers. And maybe I'll add in the sketchbook as well. Let's add in the Royal Talens back in. This is ivory tone paper as well, so we'll be able to compare. Okay, so we've got mixed media paper, watercolour paper, and then my Royal Talens. So let's do a layer of the green. And again on the watercolour paper. And lastly, my Royal Talens. So already the colour looks slightly different, a bit more yellow toned on the ivory paper. Okay, so I want to do more than one layer. Let's pick up the next one. The first colour was lime green and now I'm moving on to willow green. Okay, so it lays fine on that. It's interesting, I can kind of see how I can smudge it because I can feel like the pigment's definitely laying down a layer rather than sinking straight into the paper, especially on the mixed media paper. I can see that it's creating more of a texture on the Royal Talens, whereas on the watercolour paper and the mixed media paper I can see my lines, it's a bit more streaky. So it definitely sinks into the Royal Talens paper more than the other ones. So hopefully it shows there how it's kind of absorbed in the paper. Whereas on these two papers you can see the lines and the streakiness. I don't tend to have a really set routine on testing things. I just try things out and get ideas as I go. But let's see how quick it is to smudge. Bit of smudge there. Smudge there. Smudge there. So it definitely creates a different texture on the Royal Talons. Let's see if we can layer up another green on top. Let's try the olive dark. So I do love my olive greens. So I'm really happy to see a range of those here. Let's go on top of here. So you can see how it kind of doesn't sink in, and that's because it isn't water-based. It is a pigment-based one. So I prefer that on the Royal Talons than the other paper, especially the mixed media paper, where again it looks really, really streaky. So here you can see the differences and also the smudge test, which was pretty comparable on all of them. I think it would sit longer on the mixed media paper than the Royal Talons, but I do tend, if I am smudging, I do it quite quickly. Let's see if I can smudge the green. Okay, I'm getting a bit of pigment on my finger there, but not on the paper. Oh, okay. So they don't smudge. They are down and dry now, and they obviously are permanent. So let's do a gradient test now. Obviously, I've just done a layering test there, but let's actually try and blend them in together. So let's pick another colour family. So let's do yellow into orange. So I'm going to skip out the middle shade and go straight from the yellow to the orange. First up, we've got the Royal Talons. So I'll put down my yellow. They're a little bit squeaky, squeakier than my other brush pens. Let's see. Oh, nice. Okay, so it does pick up the pigment. You can see it is pilling a bit of the nib there, and it's pilling the paper. Maybe it's just the paper coming up actually. So you can see here, but it does blend in really nicely, and I think it helps because this paper is absorbent. So you can see the blending there. I think it's a bit more obvious in real life. Let's see if we can go over it again. You can see the nib is picking up that paper pill. So I'm just going to wipe this off. I think it's just a case of wiping it off on paper, but it's not actually affecting the nib itself. The nib is staying pretty robust and it's not beaten up at all. So it's got a bit of the orange on. Okay, let's see without that one. Let's see if I can do the middle shade and how it blends together if you did get a fuller set. So we'll start with the yellow again. Oh, okay, you can see a little bit of the orange there. So that it does hold a bit of colour on the nib. Then I'll go into the middle colour, try and blend those in a bit better. And then into the orange, which is quite a big jump up. So this is the next one in the 60 series. So definitely room for it to expand a little bit more, I think. So there is our three colours. So pretty similar actually, that you definitely don't need to have the in-between there, especially for this colour group anyway. But this is times 2 colours and this one's times 3 colours. So let's do that exact same test on the watercolour and mixed media paper. Okay, watercolour paper first. So there's the yellow into the red, orange. And I'm just going to come back in, always come back in with the lighter colour, and then it can pick up that pigment and just blend it out. Yeah, so definitely less pilling on this watercolour paper. Still a bit of let's try and blend that out a bit better. So I'm still getting some of the paper picking up on the nib, and the nib is now orange. So I'm just going to wipe that off, and I'll do it with the 3 colours here. Be interesting to see how long these last as well, because I do find that the Tombows last a really, really long time, but they're not refillable. Neither are these, but the Ecoline or the Ecolina ones are. Obviously they're very different pens because those ones are water-based, but those ones are refillable and I do really like that. Okay, so I'm doing the last test on the mixed media paper with the blending. This does feel a little bit slippier. It is much, much smoother than the watercolour paper. And just clean that off on some scrap paper. I think that's really helpful to have that. The pen nibs can bend, but they do go back to how they were. So they seem pretty flexible. And obviously from our first test, you can get thin and thick lines, which I really like. So there's our 3 tests. And again, I'll do a close-up so you can see the pilling is definitely worse on the Royal Talons, but that's to be expected. I think the best one is the mixed media paper because it's smoother. I think it works better on the smoother paper, but it does work quite well on the watercolour paper as well. I think there's just a little bit more pilling, and that's obviously because it's a rougher surface. Okay, so I'm going to use this blending liquid next. So I'm going to do, again, same test on all three. I'm going to try and mix a red and a blue, and then hopefully in the middle we'll make a purple. So this is just called red, and then I'll use this blue, which is just called blue. Okay, I thought that was going to be called ultramarine blue. Red and blue. So I'll put down my red. I'm going to leave a gap so I can get the purple, but let's also do that. Oh, we're going very French. Let's also put that next to each other. And now I'm going to apply with my little brush. I presume I could have a little pot of this, but I'm just applying it direct to my brush, and we'll see. Oh wow, okay. It does pick up a lot. Wow. It doesn't create such an intense colour in the middle, obviously, although it is getting there, but I can brush it away and it's a little bit paler. Let's do that on the bottom as well. So I'm just putting a bit more onto my brush. So now I have a dryish brush. You can definitely see where it's paler, but again, this is good for mixing up totally new shades if you don't have the full set. So I think it's really versatile in that way. So you don't need a whole multi-set. You can mix up loads of different colours just by having a smaller set and perhaps this blending liquid. Or if you're just going to layer them on, because obviously up here we were able to make that whole new shade without it. This was work better here on this one where it's overlapped rather than using the white of the page, just because it is white so it's less saturated there in the middle. But let's do that test on the watercolour paper too. So I'm going to use the exact same colours, and again I'm just going to apply the blending liquid. It's very, very wet, and I can scrub quite a lot, especially on this watercolour paper. Okay, I think that's definitely worked better on the watercolour paper, which makes sense because it's watercolour paper, so it works better with wetter mediums. Let's see how it works with the Royal Talons. Now, generally I don't tend to use a lot of water in my Royal Talons, but we'll see how it goes because I can use gouache, so it does work with wet mediums. So let's do the exact same test. So it is picking it up, but again, it's much, much paler and it's creating that effect. So I don't think this is good for this paper. It's definitely pilling. It doesn't work because this paper is too absorbent, but that did definitely work best on the other one. So let's compare those. So it's kind of created a grey on the Royal Talons. Definitely a bad sort of texture. Not a texture that I want, it's just pilled the paper there. But here is the mixed media one, a bit more pale on the top one than the bottom, and then the watercolour one. So it's definitely pale still, but you're getting a bit more of that blending that you tend to get on watercolour paper anyway. And then the bottom one is the best one, I think. Although it is definitely fading out. So it's interesting to see the differences. Definitely a big difference between the paper stocks. Okay, so there we go. Those are our tests. Obviously I've also got the swatches, but I'm really interested to see how I'll use them in my usual work. So I'm going to do a drawing just with these brush pens, just like I would normally with my Tombows, because I don't tend to add water. I do tend to just use my Tombows and my Ecolinas dry. So I'm going to just do a drawing with these and see how they compare, and I'll talk about how I found them in the voiceover, but I'll just be using them how I normally would. But hopefully it's been helpful to see these anyway, seeing the test and how they layer. I do tend to layer them up, so I'll be doing that again in my Royal Talons, which is my go-to. So let's move on to the drawing section and do a voiceover. Okay, so here we go in my sketchbook. You can see I've put down some sketch lines here and I'm just doing some tree studies on top. So I'm layering them up, you'll see as I go. I can get quite fine lines, which means I can be a little bit more careful than I am with my Tombows. So I do really like that it's got that flexibility. I like that you can do really fine lines as well as the thicker ones. Not quite as thick as the Tombows, again, because as we saw with the comparison and sharing the different nibs, these ones are definitely a lot smaller. There is a really fine tip on the Tombows, but I never use that. I much prefer this brush end because, again, the harder you press and if you change up the angle, you can get a different line. Now here is where I really started to find how I would use them in my work, and that's including a bit of smudging. So there's definitely time on this paper before it sinks in where I can just wipe it away. and the pigment does stay on top a little bit more. They do dry fast, that's one of their points in the marketing, but I found with this one I really like that I had some chance to soften it. So I'm using that quite a bit on this one, where I'm putting down my layer, adding on another layer, and then I can soften it with my finger, and that just makes it a bit less harsh. I do really like the vibrancy of these, and their biggest selling point is obviously that they are light fast. Now, I think that's a really big plus point for these, but because I am a sketchbook artist, it's not something I often think about and something that I need. But if I do want to do, for example, my Patreon originals each month and use brush pens, then this will definitely be something I reach for when I don't want to use my gouache, for example. I also come in with my coloured pencils on top. As I said, this is how I would normally use my brush pens, so I really wanted to just use them as I normally would. Again, absolutely no issues with the pencils on top. I usually just use that to define the lines a little bit more, and although I could have used the tip of this brush pen, I really like the texture that the pencils add. So on this one I'm doing another tree, again utilising my finger just to smudge it and soften out some of those marks, and I really enjoyed using that. And then here is where I really started to layer them up to create different shades. As we saw, you can obviously blend them, but generally I will just layer them up to create different shades when I'm using other pens as well, but I really like how these layer up together. I love that combination of the yellow and the green, just to create a more sort of softer yellow green, which is often used in my work, so I really like the versatility there. I think I could do a whole new swatch page where I just layer on different colours and see how they interact and how they layer to create new colours. I think there's a whole option in itself, so even if you don't have the full set, I think there's plenty of scope here, and I do really like how they work together. As I said, there is that time to be able to smudge them, which is really nice for me because I do like the softness that that brings. So although I didn't use the blending liquid here, I do think that's a really positive point of these. So obviously with the Tombos and the Ecolinas you use water. So there is a chance to be able to use these like paint and to soften them out. And because the pigment is so vibrant, I really like that you have that option, and it does turn them into sort of like paint because it did become quite thick. Now on the Royal Talons, when I really scrubbed it in, it did come through on the other side with the blending liquid, but just doing it like this, absolutely no issues. There was no bleeding through at all, so I was really impressed. Because as I said, these do kind of feel more like alcohol markers, but they're not. These are pigment markers. So that's definitely a plus point for me because I hate things bleeding through, so I can definitely see myself using these in my sketchbooks. Now, because these are different pens, that's why I haven't really compared them with the other ones, but I do want to mention price. So I've had a look on the Jackson's US site and they're available there. So the set of 12 for these Staedtler pigment brush pens were $39.84, and a set of 12 Tombos on the same Jackson site was $51.79. So there is definitely a difference. The Tombos aren't light fast, but they are, I think, a lot more well known. Whereas if you do want a light fast brush pen, I think these are a really great choice. But I'm just finishing up this page with some labels, but I really hope you found this video helpful. I know this was a long one, so if you made it to the end, thank you so much. Pop a little tree emoji in your comment and I'll know you made it right to the end, and a big thank you for watching. A big thank you to my patrons as well for their support in allowing me to create these free YouTube videos here, and I really hope you enjoyed. Do let me know in the comments if you've tried these or if you're interested in trying them out, and thank you to Staedtler for sending them to me to give it a go. I'll leave you with the final shots, and I'll see you all next week in my new YouTube video. See you later!